a blood-red sunset bleeds over the barren hills of Willow Creek, Nevada, in 1878, where Jonah Reed, a scarred sharpshooter haunted by a massacre he can never undo, lives in solitude. His past is a shadow heavier than any bullet, yet fate delivers a wounded Shoshone boy to his doorstep, stirring memories of a lost brother. Will Jonah's choice to save the child ignite a war or forge an unlikely peace? The answer lies in a dawn soaked in blood and courage. Subscribe now to uncover the full tale and share where you're listening from. What secrets will this dusty town reveal? Will redemption triumph over vengeance? Stay tuned to find out. The sun hung low over Willow Creek, Nevada Territory in 1878, painting the sky the color of spilled blood. Dust swirled through the air, carried by a dry wind that howled across the cracked earth, rattling the warped boards of Jonah Reed's shack at the town's edge. Jonah, a man whose hands had once steadied a rifle through the smoke of the Civil War, now lived like a ghost, his gray eyes shadowed by a past that refused to stay buried. 10 years ago, in a Cherokee village, his bullets had torn through the wrong lives. Men, women, children. Their faces haunted his dreams, their screams louder than any gunshot. He'd sworn off killing, traded his sharpshooter's badge for solitude. But the weight of those sins clung like damp rot. That evening, as the horizon swallowed the last sliver of daylight, a faint groan cut through the wind's wail. Jonah froze, his calloused hand tightening around the axe he'd been using to split firewood. The sound came from the dry creek bed nearby, where willows clawed at the sky with brittle fingers. He stepped cautiously, boots crunching on gravel, until he saw it. A boy, no older than 10, crumpled in the dirt. Blood soaked the kid's deerskin shirt, seeping from a jagged gash across his shoulder. His breath came in shallow gasps, each one a fight against the dark. Jonah knelt, his heart hammering. The boy's face, smeared with dust and blood, flickered in the fading light, like a memory of his own brother, dead from fever during the war. He didn't think twice. Scooping the boy up, Jonah carried him to the shack, his boots thudding against the warped porch. Inside, he laid the kid on a cot, lit a lantern, and worked fast, tearing cloth for bandages, boiling water over a stuttering fire. The wound was deep, likely from a knife, but clean enough to stitch if infection didn't take hold. As he washed the blood away, something caught his eye. A stone pendant carved with a wolf's head, tied around the boy's neck. Jonah's breath caught. That was no trinket. It marked the boy as the son of Tarak, a Shoshone chief whose name sent chills through every settler in Nevada. Tarak's raids were legend, his mercy scarce as rain. Word spread faster than wildfire. By dawn, Willow Creek buzzed like a kicked hornet's nest. Jonah stepped outside to find the townsfolk gathered in the square, their faces taut with fear. 28 Shoshone warriors had been spotted on the ridge, their silhouettes stark against the morning haze, horses pawing the earth. The townsfolk whispered of slaughter, of scalps and burning homes. The council convened in the saloon, a squat building reeking of whiskey and sweat. Voices clashed like steel. Eliza, the young schoolteacher with eyes sharp as a hawk's, argued for the boy's life, her voice cutting through the din. Amos, a blacksmith widowed by smallpox, stood with her, his massive hands clenched. But others, merchants, farmers, men with families, saw only one path. Hand the boy over. Let the Shoshone take their kin and leave. Jonah pushed through the crowd, his boots heavy on the creaking floorboards. "Give up that boy," he said, voice low but hard as iron. "And you're no better than the men who start wars for profit. You're trading a child's life for a false promise of peace." His words landed like a fist, silencing the room. But fear was a stubborn beast, and it gnawed at the crowd's resolve. Eyes darted, hands twitched toward holsters. As night fell, shadows moved beyond the lamplight. Men from Western Star, a mining outfit with dollar signs in their eyes, slipped into town. Their leader, a slick-talking suit named Carver, spoke in hushed tones to the council's weakest links. "Give us your land for a silver mine," he promised, "and we'll drive those Shoshone off for good." Some nodded, their desperation outweighing their sense. Jonah, leaning against a post outside, overheard every word. He spat into the dust. Western Star didn't want peace. They wanted blood, chaos, and control. The boy, the warriors, the town. They were all pawns in a game rigged from the start. The air grew thick with tension, the kind that precedes a storm. Jonah returned to his shack, where the boy stirred, murmuring in a tongue Jonah couldn't parse. Outside, the wind howled, carrying the distant snort of horses and the faint clink of metal. Dawn was coming, and with it, a reckoning. As the first light of 1878 crept over the jagged hills of Willow Creek, the air carried a warning sharper than a blade's edge. The distant clink of metal and the restless snort of horses had faded into an eerie silence, broken only by the creak of Jonah Reed's shack door as he checked on the Shoshone boy. The kid's fever had eased, but his eyes, dark and wide, held a flicker of fear that mirrored Jonah's own. Outside, the town braced for what was coming, the horizon glowing like a furnace ready to spit fire. Dawn broke with a roar. The Shoshone warriors charged down the ridge, their horses kicking up clouds of red dust that choked the air. War cries pierced the morning, answered by the sharp crack of rifles from Willow Creek's makeshift barricades. Jonah grabbed his old Spencer carbine, its barrel cold as the guilt in his gut, and took position behind a stack of crates near the saloon. He wasn't here to kill, not again, but to hold the line, to buy time for reason to prevail. The townsfolk fought with the desperation of cornered animals, farmers with rusty shotguns, merchants clutching pistols, even Eliza, the schoolteacher, loading rounds with steady hands. Amos, the blacksmith, swung a sledgehammer at any warrior who got too close, his face grim as stone. Bullets whined through the air, splintering wood and kicking up dirt. A young Shoshone warrior, barely older than the boy in Jonah's shack, fell from his horse, blood blooming across his chest. Jonah's stomach twisted, but he kept his aim high, firing warning shots to scatter rather than slay. The Shoshone pressed harder, their arrows hissing like vipers, one grazing Jonah's arm, leaving a hot streak of blood. The town was holding, but barely, the line fraying like a worn rope. Then came the betrayal. From the shadows of the livery stable, the Western Star men emerged, their polished rifles glinting under the rising sun. Carver, their leader, barked orders, his voice slick as oil. But their guns didn't aim solely at the Shoshone. They turned on the townsfolk, too. A farmer dropped, clutching his side, as a Western Star bullet found him. Chaos erupted. The Shoshone faltered, confused, their war cries turning to shouts of alarm. Jonah saw it clear as day. Western Star wanted a massacre, a bloodbath to break Willow Creek and the Shoshone both, clearing the way for their silver mine. He acted on instinct. Ducking through the smoke, Jonah sprinted to his shack, dodging bullets that tore chunks from the walls. The boy was awake, propped against the cot, his face pale but defiant. Jonah scooped him up, ignoring the pain in his arm, and ran toward the heart of the fight, the open ground between the saloon and the ridge. "Stay with me, kid," he muttered, his voice rough as gravel. The boy clung to him, small fingers digging into his shoulder. Jonah stepped into the open, rifle raised high, not to shoot, but to signal. "Tarak," he bellowed, his voice cutting through the din. "Your son's alive. Western Star's playing us all for fools." The boy, weak but resolute, shouted a string of Shoshone words, his voice cracking but fierce. Across the battlefield, Tarek's horse reared, his silhouette towering against the blood-red sky. The chief's eyes locked on his son, then on Jonah, a man whose name once meant death to his people. For a heartbeat, time stopped. The gunfire slowed, the air thick with dust and the weight of a choice. Tarek raised a hand, and the Shoshone held their fire. Jonah stood firm, the boy trembling in his arms, as Carver's men hesitated, their plan unraveling. This story's far from over, folks. If you're gripped by the dust and blood of Willow Creek, hit that subscribe button to ride with us to the end. Share where you're listening from. Your support keeps tales like this alive. What happens when a town and a tribe turn their guns on the real enemy? Will Jonah stand, forge peace, or seal his doom? Stick around to find out. Tarek dismounted, his steps deliberate, war paint streaked with sweat. He crossed the scarred earth, stopping a few paces from Jonah. The chief's gaze was a blade, cutting through years of hate. "My son," he said, voice low as distant thunder. He reached out, and the boy stumbled into his arms. But Tarek's eyes stayed on Jonah, searching for the truth behind the man who'd saved his blood. The battle wasn't over, but the lines had shifted, and the real fight was about to begin. Tarek's gaze lingered on Jonah Reed, a man whose hands had once drawn blood from his kin, now standing as the unlikely shield of his son. The boy, frail but alive, clung to his father's side, the wolf pendant glinting faintly in the dust-choked dawn of Willow Creek, Nevada, 1878. The battlefield lay still for a moment, the silence heavy with the scent of gunpowder and the groans of the wounded. But the fight wasn't over. Carver and his Western Star mercenaries, their scheme exposed, regrouped behind the saloon, their rifles gleaming with malicious intent. Jonah tightened his grip on his carbine, blood dripping from the gash on his arm, staining the parched earth. Tarek's nod was slight, almost imperceptible, but it carried the weight of a vow. The Shoshone chief barked a command, and his warriors shifted, their bows and rifles now trained on the Western Star men. The townsfolk, battered and betrayed, caught the signal. Eliza, her dress torn and hands smudged with gunpowder, rallied the survivors, her voice sharp as a whip. Amos, the blacksmith, hefted his sledgehammer, his eyes burning with a fury born of loss. For the first time, Willow Creek and the Shoshone stood as one, their sights set on the true enemy. The clash came swift and brutal. Carver's men fired first, their bullets ripping through the air like hornets. A Shoshone warrior fell, his horse screaming as it bolted. A townsman crumpled beside a overturned wagon, his cry swallowed by the chaos. Jonah dove behind a water trough, returning fire with precise shots that clipped the mercenaries' cover. Tarek fought like a storm, his knife flashing as he closed the distance, cutting down a gunman before he could reload. The air was thick with smoke, the ground slick with blood, but the tide turned fast. The Western Star men, outnumbered and outmaneuvered, faltered under the combined fury of the town and the tribe. Carver, cornered near the livery stable, raised his pistol, his face twisted with defiance. "You'll regret this, Reed," he spat, aiming at Jonah. Before he could fire, Tarek's arrow found his chest, and the slick talking suit collapsed, his dreams of silver buried in the dirt. The last of his men scattered, fleeing into the hills, their greed no match for the resolve of those they'd underestimated. When the final shot echoed, Willow Creek was a ruin. Buildings smoldered, bodies lay still, and the air tasted of ash. Jonah staggered to his feet, his vision swimming from blood loss. He leaned against the charred remains of his shack's porch, the boy's pendant catching his eye as Tarek approached, his son at his side. The chief's face was unreadable, carved from years of war and survival. He stopped a pace away, his hand resting on his son's shoulder. "You carried death once," Tarek said, his voice low as the wind across the plains. "Today, you carried life." He pressed a calloused hand to Jonah's shoulder, a gesture heavy with meaning, not forgiveness, but respect forged in shared struggle. Jonah nodded, the weight of those words settling into his bones. The townsfolk and Shoshone gathered in the square, their faces etched with exhaustion and wary hope. Eliza spoke first, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. "No more blood for greed," she said, glancing at Tarek. "If we rebuild, we do it together." Tarek's eyes scanned the crowd, lingering on the faces of those who'd fought beside him. He raised a hand, and a murmur rippled through his warriors. "Whoever comes to us in hunger or pain," he said, "will find shelter. This is our bond." The words weren't a treaty signed in ink, but a pact sealed in the dust and blood of Willow Creek. As night fell, the moon rose over the battered town, its silver light casting long shadows across the wreckage. Jonah sat on the edge of his porch, his arm bandaged, the pain a dull throb. The boy, now resting with his people, would live. The stars above burned bright, unyielding, like the stories that would outlast this day. Years later, under that same moonlight, children would gather, whispering of the sharpshooter who turned from death, the Shoshone boy who survived, and the dawn in 1878 when a town and a tribe chose life over vengeance. Willow Creek would never be the same, but in its scars lay a promise: redemption, hard won, under an endless Nevada sky. The dust of Willow Creek settles, but its story lingers, a tale of blood, betrayal, and hard-won redemption under a Nevada sky. What did you feel as Jonah and Tarek stood together, defying a common enemy? Did the pact under the moonlight stir hope or skepticism in you? Share your thoughts below. Your voice keeps these tales alive. I'm grateful for every listener who rode through this journey with us, and I hope you'll join me again for more stories carved from the raw heart of the West. Until we meet under the next starry sky, keep the fire of these tales burning.